As the power of the elves seems to be reaching an all-time height, now is a good time for reflection, a time for consideration, and a time for finally building the homestead that you know that you've deserved. And that's why we find ourselves here today, in this old hobbit hole, with me, Bilbo Vila. Today we find ourselves on a very special project, one that has been brought to me by a good old friend of mine, one Mr. L. Rond. And he has decided that now is a very good time to combine all of the aspects of his life into one location and call it Rivendell. Many considerations have been taken when figuring out exactly how we were going to make sure to combine all of Elrond's hobbies, goals, dreams, and the necessities of a home worth living in. After all, when you've been alive as long as he has, oh boy, not only do you have the resources to make sure the house is exactly the way you want it to be, but you're very particular about the way things are going to get constructed. And this project, well, it was definitely at times challenging. The project was one presented in a way that would challenge each and every member of the team. Non-negotiables were the first thing that Elrond offered up. Floors made with giant circular pegs coming out of every single inch, and yet constructed out of mystical wood that volunteered for the project. Of course, there are certain amenities that one cannot go without. A kitchen, bedrooms, bathrooms, certain areas for entertaining, but things also needed to be considered that none of us had put into focus. For example, it was pointed out to us by Elrond that he would oftentimes be entertaining guests who were far shorter than most elves. At which point I asked exactly what heights we had to accommodate, and he, after shrugging, simply said anywhere between 2 feet tall and 14 feet tall. Well, I'll tell you right there, a lot different than trying to convert a colonial in Maine to make sure that it's up to date for the 21st century. All of the materials, absolutely natural. Floors completely covered in circular pegs so that it could utilize a locking system. It was a very interesting challenge, but not one that we could not tackle as a team. Now, there were a couple of things that made my team scratch their heads. For example, the natural water usage. All of the water coming in would be provided by a mystical singing, silver-watered spring that ran downhill and eventually cascaded in the backdrop, majestically, dare I say, in a picturesque fashion. Some of that water would be diverted, singing its way through the pipes, which had to be specifically made of silver. Difficult. And then, when asking how to drain out or whether or not we wanted to go with septic or sewer, Elrond simply chuckled and said that all of the water would be evacuating the building and be magically transported to a place where it would be perfectly recycled and put back in to the singing spring over the hills. Interesting. Now, we were told that there was natural energy sources that would circumnavigate any need for tapping into the electrical grid. When asked precisely what those were, Elrond simply said that when the spirits of the Maiar needed to provide them energy, he would ask them, and they would give it. A tricky one, to say the least. Almost like working with Martha Stewart that one time. But I digress. So, we still made sure to install candelabras, but as was stated, each and every one of them had to be made of the woodland materials that were provided and would, in fact, volunteer psychically so that they could be converted into candelabras. Lastly, heat and AC, making sure that no matter the weather, whomever was there would be comfortable. This presented a particular difficulty, given that there would be no doors or windows, pretty much walls, for that sake. When asking Elrond about this and how he wanted to go about solving the climate problem, well, again, with a sharp look in his eye that reminded me of that one character from The Matrix, Elrond informed me that if heat was needed, then it would erupt like lava from the very ground beneath their feet. And if they needed a cool breeze to lower the temperature of the surroundings and all those within it, then the northern ice peaks would, in their generosity and in loving kindness, express their eternal gratitude towards Elrond by providing northern winds that would drop the temperature. Personally, we all found ourselves a little bit perplexed by all of this, so we just simply went with it. The last bit, however, was, of course, something that everyone should consider, because Elrond has a family. Many members of a family. Not quite sure how Elrond is related to everyone who lives here, but I'm not going to ask questions. Everyone to their own lifestyle, as it were. But Elrond did express a certain level of concern when it came to intruders, specifically orcs. And so we made sure to get in some locally sourced alarm systems utilizing motion detection, infrared, and of course, Hwacha. As plans started to develop, I found myself intrigued by all of the things that Elrond wished to include. A full-size Olympic swimming pool, but not one that was tiled, mind you, but was lined by the branches of a certain kind of tree. And utilizing mud that we packed ourselves, we would place a specific leaf from the woods into the mud, and it would offer a perfect seal. There was the need for a forge. I'm not quite sure what business Mr. Elrond is in, but I will say this. He is an industrious fella, and therefore we want to make sure that given the amount of money and effort he is willing to put into this project, we wanted to make sure that every single thing that he needs to do can be facilitated upon the grounds. While I myself may question the exact design of the forge that he wanted, well, to each their own, really. The library was a beautiful achievement, though humidity control was a little bit beguiling, given that, as I stated before, there were no windows, no walls, no doors. Simply wooden archways that seemed to spring directly out of the ground and be bleached perfectly white. The one thing that we could make sure of was that the dining area could seat every conceivable configuration of people that he could possibly have over for dinner. Apparently, Elrond is very popular with the local populations, and at times has quite the soirees, including the dwarves, the hobbits, the ents, some wizards, and, well, there is that, on occasion, pool party that he likes to throw, where he invites all of the speaking animals. And who's to say exactly how crazy things get, but I am more than willing to support the needs of my client. Now, the last thing he required was an open-air conference area that would be fully capable of providing multimedia content to each one of the attendants. There was, of course, Xerox printers, a couple of projectors installed into the floor that could ascend whenever necessary, and a perfectly, dare I say, death metal-esque pedestal of stone that could emerge from the ground and present itself so that you could put very small mystical objects on it, and everyone could stare dramatically at them in the center of the conference room. Just like every project, there are ups and downs, twists and turns, and things that will catch you completely unawares. I, myself, am a huge fan of a good cathedral ceiling, making sure that there's a lot of airy space. And honestly, with the construction that was offered up and the demands that were made by Elrond, a cathedral ceiling served, well, the best possible outcome. After all, when you don't have walls or glass or, well, anything other than just large, loping, cathedral-esque door openings that go pretty much everywhere, a cathedral ceiling is a good option and allows for the concealing of all insulation that you need to put in. Because I will be darned if, while the floor plan is completely exposed to the elements, I don't build a roof that can make sure that no rain gets in. Another wonder of the project was that all of the items that were utilized in the construction were easily sourced locally, within at least one horse carriage ride's distance. We were provided stone from some of the stonemasons of the dwarves. We were given some very convenient large amounts of silver from the Rohirrim, and we were given wood from the woods that just sprung up when Elrond said, "Hey, that's where an archway goes." That's where an archway went. It was nifty. I will, however, have to state the following. If at any point in the future you find yourself constructing in Middle-earth, please be advised that there is some, dare I say, animosity between magical contractors and union employees. I, of course, brought my team with me, and as always, they are allotted a certain amount of time every day to have a coffee break and lunch, to call home. Their work days start at 9 a.m. and end at 5 p.m. But apparently, with magic contractors, well, sometimes you can be working even when you're sleeping in a bed that you magically conjured out of nowhere underneath a tent that you yourself wished into existence. No matter the project, no matter how often you find yourself butting heads with the customer and finally coming to some sort of resolution, it was in our best interests, as always, when presented with the children of the customer, to try to accommodate the child as much as possible. So when Elrond introduced us all to his daughter, well, we took our opportunity to razzle and dazzle for the young lady in any way, shape, or form we could. Now, the young miss of the household, she's a little bit of a social media influencer, from what I understand. And she had very specific goals she was trying to achieve with her own little section of the property, what she lovingly referred to as the grotto. Not a whole lot in the way of accoutrement, a lot of open spaces, very similar to the main body of the house, simply a fainting couch in the center of what could only be called a white oak gazebo. Interesting, perplexing, but kind of fit in with the rest of the energy that she gave off. Finally, we were informed that a body of water would have to be located close by, one that would be natural and mystical, as she put it. She wanted it to be, and I quote, a place of spiritual healing, AF. We did the very best we could, and along the way only ran into one true difficulty, that every single time we tried to install a railing to make sure that she didn't plummet into the waters, she insisted we take it out. There was some foot stomping, and occasionally there was some kind of speech thrown in the direction of one of the team that made them turn into something furry and, dare I say, unnatural. Luckily, we were able to smooth things over by installing a perfectly concealed water turbine system underneath the babbling waterfall that she absolutely wanted to have. In so doing, we were capable of running enough underground wiring to provide her the electricity that she would need in order to run every single ring light that she had, which was roughly 18. Years slipped by. Ages passed into ages. We lost track of days. My crew grew beards, and honestly, most of them grew a lot shorter than they used to be. Started wearing chainmail and armor, only working with axes. Such was not completely and totally unheard of. I remember working construction and carpentry during the 70s, so this kind of thing was not something I hadn't experienced before. It was day 383 of the project, and we had finally retrieved all of the perfectly color-schemed tiles for the roof from a local bog, where we were told to go and speak to an extremely large frog who would simply open his mouth and spit them out into portioned piles. And we were informed that Lord Elrond was going to be having a party coming up, and that we needed to kick things into high gear. Now, making sure that everything was prepared for guests, we started focusing on some details that we know as the contractors of this old Hobbit hole are required by any inspector to make sure the property is ready to be occupied. Instead, however, Elrond pointed out to us that we needed to be sure that the place was Wi-Fi accessible, that the speeds of the internet were, in his words, as fast as the ring wraiths. I don't know what a ring wraith is, but I'm assuming, since we ran the entire place with a T1 line, that he, by far, has the speeds that he needs. Secondly, we laid copper wiring, as instructed, between each one of those color-coded tiles that we were told to get from the frog out in the middle of the bog. And wouldn't you know it, having done so, our electrician, Gary, was able to inform us that, in fact, the entire house was not only wired perfectly and up to code, but it also had 7.1 surround sound in every single room, which was pretty astounding given we hadn't installed any speakers. Everything was running quite wonderfully at this point. We thought we could do no wrong, and yet this was when we were informed, and we had to inform Elrond that we would have a little bit of a delay when it came to the final floor setup, since the slab granite had been delayed due to a loss of communication with Moria. Several faxes had been sent. I had emailed as well, and had even done the due diligence of driving my work mummakill over to the Moria general contractor's office, but found that a sign had been hung in the window in a language that I didn't understand. But when I stared at it, it glowed in the moonlight. While we waited to figure out how we could source the slab for the flooring in the meeting hall from another location, we proceeded to complete all aspects of construction on the rest of the facility, including my crowning achievement, the Grand Foyer. Now, it is tough to say exactly where the hands of Bilbo Vila stopped working and where the weird wood that grew itself out of the ground picked up. But I can say this. At moments like this, it is right for me to fall silent and for the pictures to speak for themselves, instead of a simple architect, carpenter, plumber, electrician, and PBS show host. Well, gosh, they should have sent a poet. Just look at the majesty of it. Through the course of Boromir's inspection, he, I'm pretty sure, died roughly 18 times, falling off of things, onto things. I was sure at one point he had actually stabbed himself with his own sword, but nevertheless, he still kept going, and honestly was cheerful, with a lovely disposition, quite the nice accent, and magnificent hair. With less than 3 hours on the grounds, Boromir simply went, good enough," signed the illuminated manuscript in, dare I say, the finest handwriting I had ever seen, simply looked at me and said, "I'll give this to you now, but you must make sure there is a horse ramp, so that I and all of my kin can ride our horses directly into the meeting room." I didn't know why that was necessary, but I did it. As projects began to wrap up, as this one was, given the only thing we had left to do was finish the floor in the meeting hall, certain artistic flourishes are always entertained, and we took our time since we were being paid by the hour, and, well, we were getting paid since we were standing around anyway, waiting for the slab to show up. Elrond asked us if he would be able to pull off a couple of things that were very specific to his own needs, and I said, absolutely not a problem. We made sure that the entirety of the building was plastered in murals. There were tons of murals being painted almost simultaneously, and yet the art style was consistent throughout. The school, wherever the Elvish artists come from, must be very strict when it comes to aesthetics. And it seemed as though every single one of the murals told a different part of their history, and oftentimes would include a very unsafe, pointy-armored individual who I was told was no good. Another thing that we needed to make sure of was that every single room, instead of having any kind of soundproofing or dampening, allowed for greater acoustics. When asked exactly how dramatic the acoustics needed to be, Elrond simply said that they needed to be like the bathrooms in New York City subway stations. That in and of itself boggled my mind. But what further boggled my mind was when we arrived one day to discover that certain trees around the perimeter of Rivendell seemed to have been carved with figures of other elvish individuals. When asked exactly what those were, Elrond informed us that those were memorials for the elves that had fallen. A lovely gesture, I thought to myself, but also found each and every one of them disturbing in their detail, and the fact that I couldn't detect a single tool mark on any one of the carvings. Likewise, the stone statues on the exterior of the building one day just seemed to be there, and each and every one of them were perfectly proportioned, almost lifelike, and dare I say, so scary in fact, that I wondered if the entirety of the property had been taken over by the Weeping Angels. The oddest part of the project came at the very end. Elrond came to me right before the end of work one day and said he had a very special project that he needed specifically from me, one artisan to the other, and that touched my heart in a very special way. The request, however, was an oddity. He asked me for a pedestal that would be draped in velvet, and upon that pedestal and upon that velvet there would be placed the broken parts of a sword. Now, I don't know what the practicality of keeping a broken sword is, but I will say this. I offered on more than one occasion to forge that thing back together, especially since I knew that there was a grade A forge on the property, even though it was a little bit questionable in the way that none of the heat was contained, so that you kept all of the projects you were working on at a temperature where you could work the metal properly. Well, it's day 7348, and apparently we've got to wrap things up. Now, I've been informed that we might have to come back, or we might just consolidate this down into one episode. Might take all of what we've got, break it up into 3 parts, possibly 2. Who's to say? Who's to know? It's all a matter of budget, really. As Mr. Elrond came to me yesterday and informed me that our services would no longer be required, that the camera crew could leave, that my team could mosey on, that the gold would be deposited in Minas Tirith, wherever that might be. And that was perfectly fine by me, but I needed to know. I needed to be sure that every single person who was walking these halls and going up these unrailed staircases or going out on these fairly unprotected balconies would be safe. And Mr. Elrond assured me that every single facet of it would be fine, because they had hired a new health and safety inspector, you see, and also taken the liberty of hiring a new insurance agent. And while they were at it, I brought on a new plumbing, HVAC, and electrical inspector. I found the whole thing a little bit curious, so I asked very politely if I could meet these fine individuals, and was informed that it was a single individual standing right there afar off, on that rolling hill, with the sun perfectly behind him. As I approached him, getting up a little bit of gumption, I could smell that what he was smoking, well, brought me back to my summers in the 60s of building yurts in upstate New York. It was a calming wave, dare I say an aura, passed from that individual to me, and as I approached I found a smile forming upon my face. I walked up to the cherry-faced gentleman and said, quite frankly, that I needed to make sure everything was going to be okay, that everyone was going to be safe, that the whole of Rivendell was going to be sound, because at this juncture, anybody could fall from the 3rd story to the 2nd story to the 2nd story to the 1st story, the 1st story into the magical waterfall that's constantly singing, that really you can't tell whether or not it is singing, because everybody else who's in the midst of Rivendell is singing, and I'm pretty sure Rivendell itself may in fact be singing at the same time as well as the woods around it. The individual simply smiled and nodded and said everything would be all right, that I'd be all right too, that I could go home and know that I was going to live a life full of beauty and future episodes. When I asked him how he was so sure, he said, well, I'm as sure as my name is Tom Bombadil. Not quite sure, not quite how, but I can tell you for now, that's the end of our story, the end of this old hobbit hole, doing quite magical work here at Rivendell. So I hope you'll consider joining us for our next episode. And if you've enjoyed this one, feel free to donate a little money to our local affiliate so that you can get a tote bag that might in fact include a very nice golden ring that if you put in a fireplace might have hidden writing on it. Until next time, I've been Bilbo Villa for this old hobbit hole.
Quack 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 quack. Quack 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 quack. Quack 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 quack. Quack 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 quack. Quack 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 quack. Moo 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 moo. Moo 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 moo. Moo 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 moo. Moo 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 moo. Pterodactyl, pterodactyl, pterodactyl. Pterodactyl, pterodactyl, dact. Pterodactyl, dact. Pterodactyl, dact. Pterodactyl, dactyl, dactyl, dact. Ma 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 ma. Ma 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 ma. Ma 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 ma. Ma 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 ma. Ferndi burndi heedy bitty burndi. For burndi hurty bitty birdy poo. For burndi baby, bitty me it me. For hunty bitty hunty bitty doo.